Catherine Gucci, you're practicing, you're putting OER out there in hundreds of schools in Africa. Tell us your view on what the promise of OERs are for the developing world and what you've learned in your work.
Thank you. I would hesitate to speak for the whole of the developing world, but I can certainly speak to the experience of OER Africa. And I would agree, first of all, with Ilka that technical platforms, technology itself, does not encourage wider participation in innovative processes, or indeed necessarily encourage wider participation in innovative teaching and learning practices. What we've done over the past 4 or 5 years at OER Africa is to work closely with faculty in African universities. And these are faculty who are committed to improving both the quality of their curriculum and the educational experience of their students. And because of this, they are frequently considering new ways in which different forms of collaboration between peers and across disciplines might result in better teaching and learning. Within higher education institutions in Africa, as in the rest of the world, increased investments in educational technology are more and more the norm, as it is expected that such investments should result in improved educational outcomes. But it is now increasingly accepted that, as it was put by Ilka, technology itself doesn't generate specific outcomes. So neither the technological quality of an online platform nor its ability to facilitate collaboration is dependent on whether the source coding is openly shared, as would be the case with an open source platform, or if that source coding is inaccessible, as is usually the norm with a platform built using commercial software. So the openness or not of the software built to use the platform is only one in a range of criteria that will result in whether or not the platform is a useful tool for collaboration between networks of educators. So to the question that was asked of this panel, can online platforms, including teacher networks dedicated to sharing best practice and promoting innovation, really provide a means for building the knowledge base, including in less developed countries? Or do they simply facilitate the relatively uncoordinated exchange of ideas? The answer is clearly that online platforms might do either. That in fact, the role a platform plays in promoting either a cohesive and well-coordinated sharing of ideas, or instead a jumbled exchange of disconnected streams of consciousness, depends not only on the technical quality of the platform, but more so on the extent to those for whom the platform has been created, constructed, are actually equipped and also willing to use it. In many developing countries, faced with the imperative to educate a greater cadre of professionals, mid-level managers, teachers, doctors, nurses, technicians, and so forth, print-based distance education, along with good tutorial systems, good assessment feedback systems, all of these remain critical, even as global improvements in technology have also enabled the development of new forms of pedagogy. And it's within this context that OER proponents argue that open educational resources have the potential to revive higher education standards, to make curricula once more current and contextually relevant, and to foster collaboration and knowledge sharing between institutions, all of which will, or we hope, will benefit the students. And although OER have been defined in many ways, a widely accepted definition is that of materials offered freely and openly for educators, students, and self-learners to use and reuse for teaching, learning, and research. So the essence of OER revolves around that license, an open license that permits the adaptation and the reuse of educational materials without the need to pay license fees. The ability to contextualize resources that might have been created elsewhere and make them appropriate for use in a different environment. So there's not only a potential cost-saving element to OER, but this open license also permits the use of materials without the need to seek the permission of the author, while still respecting the terms stipulated by the author. And those of you who've tried to find the source of a particular pithy quote or wonderful piece of music, it's time-consuming, it's difficult. With an open license, you follow the terms of the license, you're done. And so whether or not one agrees with the OER proponents, it is worth noting that in this digital era, the free flow and sharing of educational content is a global reality. In most instances, it's already too late for faculty to be asking why I should share my content, because the chances are your students have done so already. And what faculty maybe need to focus on is the means by which they might influence how their content is shared, because shared it will be. So whatever the potential of openly licensed educational resources for improving teaching and learning, whatever the potential of collaborative platforms to act as a tool for building the knowledge base, it is people who determine whether or not these technological investments made by an institution of higher education will actually foster collaboration or innovation or even a rupture between the way things were and the way things could be. But if we assume the existence of this perfect open platform constructed to the highest technological specifications, including accessibility to those who live and work in developing countries where broadband connectivity may be imminent but is not yet a reality, then we have to accept that, as with any other innovation, there will be both successes and failures in this space. And we also must accept that both the successes and what we choose to learn from the failures will both make a significant contribution to education in all countries. And if we accept that, then we must also insist that to continue to speak in 2011 of lack of connectivity and poor bandwidth as part and parcel of the reality of educational institutions in the developing world is simply no longer acceptable. We have to strengthen the advocacy calls at all levels for proper technological infrastructure and for a level-headed interrogation of the relationships that exist between some governments and some monopoly telecommunication companies that often prevent connectivity being accessible at an affordable rate to those in many developing countries. It's not free. It's not accessible. It's beyond the reach of far too many people. And it is only when we have a commitment to resolve these kinds of challenges that we will be able to facilitate the sharing of intellectual capital, both across developing countries and from those countries with the rest of the world. At OER Africa, we found that when the process of development of OER is guided by a real need for relevant resources, then these processes of creation, of adaptation, have also provided faculty with very practical opportunities to learn or to relearn pedagogical skills, to acquire new technical skills. And they've also served the needs of students to acquire pertinent and applicable competencies where relevant resources either didn't exist or were beyond the financial reach of either the students or the institutions themselves to acquire legally. So in many cases, collaborative endeavor has been integral to these processes. Imagine then how much richer the global knowledge base would be if those involved in such innovative practices in the developing world, as well as elsewhere, those who struggled, as well as those who triumphed, could access an online platform to share with others how they were able, for example, to move from an over-reliance on lectures as a means of delivering the curriculum to a more facilitatory role of guiding their students and encouraging a more problem-based and collaborative approach to their higher education experience, and therefore, hopefully, to the practice of those students once they leave the physical and virtual spaces of the university.
Thank you, Catherine, for your eloquent remarks. I think the OER world is in good hands with advocates such as yourself. The notion that we need to think about educational resources is not simply texts, but as sites where we can share failures, where we can understand how these are being implemented, where we can see the conversations that surround them. It's certainly part of how we need to re-envision an educational resource. So